Welcome back. In this video, we're going to look at arrays, and we're going to require arrays in order to make sure that we can select a random word, which then will be populated in this word to find text. So instead of word to find, which is currently hard coded and is the word that we're looking for, we want this to be randomized, and it will be then selected from a list of words that we are going to create. And we're going to store them in one variable. And in order to store multiple values in one variable, we're going to use arrays. And that's why, well, this lecture is going to be about arrays. Let's get started looking at what arrays can do for us. Arrays are used to store multiple values in a single variable, instead of declaring separate variables for each value. Imagine, for example, for your grocery list, instead of getting a piece of paper for every item you need to buy, you would usually make, well, a list, a single piece of paper with several items. And arrays are basically that. Just declare a variable as you would with any other variable and add the squared brackets to it. And that'll tell C# that you want to use an array of the data type. So here you can see an example array. We have the private keyword, which indicates that this will be a variable that will only be usable within that same script. Then we have the data type string, and we have those squared brackets. So these are indicating that this variable called groceries should be an array of type string. And then after the equal sign, we're assigning the values that we want to assign to this groceries variable. And in order to assign values to an array, you can see you are using curly brackets here. So in this case, because we are using strings, we have to enter string items in here. So we cannot use different types of data in the same variable, in the same array. It always has to be the same data type. So in this case, we're defining it's going to be a string, so we cannot enter any numbers here. It has to be strings. And we separate the individual values that we want to have inside of this array by using the comma separator here. And of course, as always, we have the semicolon at the end. So to access the individual items in our array, we would need to access the specific position, or properly called index, and an array always starts counting at 0. Like in this case, milk has the index of 0. So if we want to access the milk, we would use the squared brackets 0. So that's going to give us the position of the milk. If you wanted the eggs, we would use the 2 here. So index 2. Let's see that in action and implement it into our game. Therefore, let's go back to our script. And here, let's go ahead and create a new variable that will be our words. And I'm going to create a private string. And here you can see I'm using the squared brackets, indicating that this variable will be an array. And then I give it a name. So I'm going to call this one words local, because this will be the words that I'm going to use, but they will be locally stored. And later on, you will see how to use words that will be coming from a text file. So they will not come from our code itself, but our code will read from a text file. Okay, and here I'm just going to have a couple of values in there. So I'm going to use the curly brackets and the semicolon afterwards. So this for now would be, for example, a string array with no values. But then let's assign a couple of values. For example, Matt. And then let's use Joanne. So I'm going to use names here. Then Robert. And then Mary. And let's say Mary Jane, like so. So you see, because I'm using strings, every single item inside of the array has to be a string. So you can see Matt is a string because we're using quotation marks. The same goes for Joanne, the same goes for Robert, and they are separated by a comma. So now if you were to use an integer array, what you would do is, well, you can add the access modifier, then use the int keyword, then the squared brackets, and let's call this my nums, so my numbers. And then again, in curly brackets, I would enter the numbers. So 3, 5, 7, 8, and so forth. Okay, and then of course at the end a semicolon. So now if I want to access individual items, what I will need to do is I'm going to need to access them by using their index. Okay, so let's use a debug log here just to see that real quick. And let's access our words local like so. So words local for now would display the field, the entire field. But if we want to access one particular item, we need to use the square brackets again. And here we need to say which item we want to have. So let's say using 0 will give me the first entry because programming languages start counting at 0. So Matt is 0, Joanne is 1, Robert is 2, Mary Jane is 3. Okay, so let's save this script real quick and let's run it so that we can then see what will be displayed on our console. So let's run this real quick. And we can see it says Matt here. Okay, so it displayed Matt. Now instead, let's display index 2, which should give us Robert. Okay, let's save the script once again, go back to Unity, and once it's ready, let's run it. And we will see it says Robert. Now you can, of course, also assign values. So let's say I were to override it in my code. Let's say I were to override the second position here, like so, and saying Dennis instead. So instead of Robert, I would have Dennis in there at the index 2 position of my words local array. Let me save this script once again, go back to Unity, and let me run it. And you see it says Dennis instead. So now you saw how you can create such an array, how you can assign values to such an array. Here in this case, assign value to an array at a specific position or index. And this here is how you retrieve data. So access data from an array at a given index. So now a little challenge for you. Please make a calculation with my nums, with all of the values that are inside of my nums, but don't use any for loops or anything. If you are experienced already, just use the very basic approach as we've seen here to get the value, and then add all of them together and debug them onto the console. So display them using debug log onto the console as a result. Okay, so I hope you tried it. So basically what we will need is a new variable. I'm going to create an int result, which will be my nums 0 plus my nums 1 plus my nums 2 plus my nums 3. So here you have to be careful that you really only use as many items as you have created inside of your array, because otherwise you will run into an index out of bounds exception error. So now let's just display it onto the log. So let's use the result to display it like so. Okay, let's save the script and let's run it real quick. And you can see the result is 23. Well, let's double check. 3 plus 5 plus 7 plus 8 is 23, because that's 8 and this here is 15. 8 plus 15 is 23. Okay, so that's basically how you can use arrays. And you are not limited to simple data types such as strings or ints to use arrays. You can use any type of array. You can even use arrays for all types of data types, for texts, for floats, for strings. So you can see even this would be a data type, because every class can be used as a data type. Okay, so that's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to actually implement the functionality for our game. So let me get rid of the code that is not really part of the actual game, and words local will be the only one. So see you in the next video.